Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. My name is Michael Chikeen, and I'm very excited to speak with Dr. Daria Kuss today. Dr. Kuss is a chartered psychologist, chartered scientist, and associate professor in psychology at Nottingham, Trent University. She created the Masters of Science program in Cyberpsychology and is a member of the International Gaming Research Unit. She's an award-winning author with her most recent book titled Internet Addiction, Evidence-Based Practice in Psychotherapy. Outside of academia, Dr. Kuss has worked with the World Health Organization, the European Parliament, and the Government Council of the Czech Republic. Her research has been covered in the international news outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the BBC. And it seems her research and body of work become more and more prescient every day as we all collectively lose our minds to the internet. So Dr. Kuss, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I guess early in your academic career, I'm curious what exactly pushed you so confidently down this path of cyberpsychology and internet addiction that's, seems to be taking up all of our time these days.
Well, I've got university degrees in media studies as well as psychopathology, so the study of mental disorders. And my aim was really to combine my academic knowledge and interests into one. With my work that I've done early on in my research, I've been able to speak with people, gamers, young gamers who unfortunately have developed problems as a consequence of their excessive gaming. And from that early work, I really gained an interest into, exploring gaming worlds further and really trying to understand what is it that really makes particular games potentially more problematic. What kinds of symptoms might people experience who might develop problematic behaviors in the context of technology use, specifically gaming, but also social media use and other forms of technology. And based on this, I've developed the research area. I'm now working within the field of cyberpsychology, which is the psychology of internet use and that of digital technologies use. And I'm very interested in finding out both, the positives as well as the benefits of our everyday engagement with technology.
Right. Let's go back to gaming for a second before we go to positive uses, etc. So, because I had a similar conversation I have a slew of younger cousins that are about 10 or 15 years younger than me. And we were talking about the differences between when I was growing up in the same town, I'm in my early 40s, and when they were growing up. And what I was saying is that the only thing I really had was TV and the old school video games that were not connected on the internet. And so if I was home, I had to interact with my parents that no one really wants to do when you're a teenager. So you would take any opportunity to get the hell out of the house. Whereas my male cousins when they were growing up in their teens, they were saying their main connection to their friends was Call of Duty and this connection that they could speak to everybody. And so there really wasn't that impetus for them to leave the house and go to interact in person with their friends. So I'd be curious what you found with some of the harms that come with maybe growing up in an environment like that using those games.
I don't necessarily think that growing up in the environment with games is necessarily causing any kinds of problems, really. I think when we're talking about problematic behavior, what we would be talking about more is problematic behavior that's actually diagnosable. And by diagnosable, I mean that we have an actual classification system that is using a classification of internet gaming disorder or gaming disorder in order to diagnose people and then to provide the relevant treatment if that's required. So it's only a very small minority of excessive gamers who actually meet the relevant criteria. And those criteria are currently present in the World Health Organization's ICD-11, the International Classification for Diseases, 11th edition, which has been published a few years ago. So as a consequence of this classification, we know that gaming disorder has a significant research behind it to indicate that it is indeed a mental disorder that can be diagnosed, that can be classified, and for which specific kinds of treatments are available. The significant majority of problematic gamers will fall within the non-diagnosable category. So they might experience some problems potentially as a consequence of their excessive gaming. However, those problems are not sufficient for them to be classed as actually addicted or disordered gamers. For that reason, I think it's really important to make that distinction between, somebody who is perhaps spending too much time gaming, who might perhaps, as a consequence, neglect some of the social responsibilities, relationships, any other things that they might need to do in life, and somebody who's developing problems that are indeed diagnosable, that are so severe that they may require professional help in order to be overcome.
Okay, so you're more focused on when there's an actual diagnosable condition that leads to some of the worst outcomes, but does it seem to be there's not so much focus on reduced sociability? It's most where can we diagnose something so we can help people?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very important to make that kind of a distinction. But of course, we don't want to disregard those individuals who may experience some problems as a consequence of their gaming, where, preventative frameworks may be really helpful in order to help them. And those preventative frameworks, unfortunately, are few and far between, especially in the Western world.
Right.
In Southeast Asia, in contrast, there are significantly better, significantly more supportive networks, frameworks available for those individuals. And I would hope that countries such as the UK, where I'm currently based in, are going to develop similar frameworks as well in the future.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because and maybe this isn't a correct comparison because I think as we evolve our understanding for how these new technologies are affecting our lives, our brains, our mental health, etc. I wonder if it's a little bit analogous with drinking, where we'd be like, okay, well, if you're an alcoholic or you have cirrhosis of the liver or you're a rate, you're violent when you drink, these are all problems that we can see. Whereas now we're starting to see even casual alcohol use is really not good for our health in general. So I suppose, how are you able to quantify when exactly someone needs treatment? Like what are you seeing that is diagnosable? At what point does it have to reach for someone to clinically be diagnosed with a gaming problem?
The main important symptom that we would use in order to potentially see whether or not somebody might be classified as having a gaming disorder would be the significant impact, detrimental impact on their everyday life, which extends normally over the period of 12 months. So the significant impairment may be characterized by impairment in everyday domains such as work and professional pursuits, academic pursuits, social relationships, for example, being able to look after yourself physically as well as mentally, being able to actually spend time with people around you and not necessarily just limiting the time that you have on the use of technology. And these kinds of symptoms need to be so severe that they're causing the individual significant distress of an extended period of time, which is when we may consider whether or not they should seek a professional such as psychologist, psychiatrist, mental health professional in order to check whether or not they may have a diagnosis, which in that case, if that was to be the case, may lead them to be seeking actual professional treatment in order to help them alleviate the problems.
Wow. And in a world that we're so connected with phones and computers that we kind of need it for everyday life, especially even for jobs. If someone's diagnosed with a gaming disorder, what is a standard protocol right now to help treat that?
There are a number of ways in which it can be treated. So, research that we've done shows that there are various treatment approaches that appear to be quite successful, depending on both the actual condition that the person is suffering with, as well as a potential comorbidity, so co occurring disorders. What is very common in gaming disorder, as well as other related conditions, is that they are comorbid with other conditions. So, there may be a symptom framework where various mental disorders are present. So in the case of gaming disorder, it's often the case that we've got anxiety disorders or depression, for example, as being comorbid. And then if we have comorbidities, then we also need to treat the comorbidities. It's very important to have a full diagnosis in order to find the best treatment approach. But currently, when looking at the research base, what we find on an international scale is that cognitive behavioral therapy seems to be a very efficacious and efficient treatment approach. So it doesn't cost very much, and it is able to help people within a relatively short time frame to actually improve their symptoms. That might not work for everybody. It really depends on the severity of the problems, as well as co-occurring disorders and other health-related issues. But it is indeed a very successful approach, generally speaking.
Can you give us an example of what the CBT therapy would look like for someone? Because again, I'm a little confused for someone that's gaming all the time, and all of a sudden they have their phone in their pocket, they're online all the time. So, what sort of CBT treatments would someone be working on to help with their gaming problem?
So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It looks to change your thinking, to change your behaviors, and to change your emotions, because they are inherently intertwined with one another. So in order to be able to change behaviors, we will have to look at the cognition, so the thoughts, as well as the emotions, or the feelings that are tied to that. So one important element of CBT is really to recognizing how these things belong together. So, for example, a patient, somebody who's indeed impacted by gaming disorder, might find out what are the triggers for their gaming. So, for example, they might use gaming to escape from their real life problems. They might have some problems with their boss at work, for example, and then they escape into the gaming world, where they're able to relax, where they're able to think about something else, where they are able to distract themselves from those kinds of problems. And if such a trigger is indeed present, and the person is able to realize that that kind of a trigger is present in their life, and they're actually cognitively aware of that, they might change, they might adapt their behaviors. Yeah, so they may actually alternate their behaviors in such a way that potentially they find themselves a different coping mechanism, a more functional kind of a coping mechanism. Because we know that excessive gaming or excessive technology use can, in some cases, be a dysfunctional coping mechanism. And what we'd like to do is to try and create more functional coping mechanisms to be able to deal with everyday life problems.
Okay, and can you define maybe what the difference between a gaming disorder would look like in comparison to like an internet disorder? Because I imagine like an internet phone disorder is kind of the same thing, whereas a gaming disorder is different. Is that right?
So gaming disorder is an actual diagnostic category which is present in the diagnostic manuals, whereas internet addiction or smartphone addiction are not. So I think that is
Hmm.
probably one of the
Wow.
main distinctions there. Both internet addiction, as well as smartphone addiction and social media addiction, various types of internet addictions have been considered for inclusion in the diagnostic manuals, but in the present day and age, we do not have sufficient research evidence in order to include them. For that reason, gaming disorder at the moment is the only one of those that is indeed in the diagnostic manuals. It can be treated based on being present in those.
Wow, because from the research that I've seen online and read, obviously you're probably much more aware of, is that it seems like there is a lot of anxiety and depression coming from social media, et cetera. That's mostly used on computers and phones. So, what is your opinion that so far the DSM doesn't classify internet or phone usage as an issue yet, whereas gaming is? Do you think there's some movement on that? I'd love to hear where you think we are.
I think the main problem really with missing a number of diagnoses in the DSM or in the ICD is that there isn't sufficient research evidence present for any of those: social media addiction, smartphone addiction, etc.
Hmm.
The research that we do have, which oftentimes shows association between extended use, excessive use, and various mental health related symptoms such as anxiety, depression, and addiction. It is mostly associations that we're looking at, not necessarily causative studies, so we don't necessarily know whether that particular technology use is causing those kinds of symptoms. Those studies are very difficult often to be replicated. There are problems with the research measurement tools that have been used in a lot of those studies. They cannot be compared across studies and across cultures. So, from a research perspective, what needs to be done is to really engage in research that is both valid as well as reliable, that can be replicated, and that holds across different kinds of cultures. Once we're able to be able to do that kind of research, to produce those research papers that give us those relevant insights, there may be possibility to reconsider the inclusion of other potential disorders in the diagnostic manuals.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I thought we were closer to being able to say that this is a general problem. I know there's a popular book that I think is either out or coming out soon. I think it's from Jonathan Haidt, called The Anxious Generation. And in there, I think it seems like he's done a lot of more correlative data, being that anxiety and depression, especially in teenage girls, has gone through the roof since 2010 or 2012. Boys are having this issue. Talking to parents and teachers, they think everyone's losing their mind. So it seems like in the zeitgeist, everyone agrees that social media and phones are kind of driving us a little bit insane, and as far as our sociability and especially impacting kids largely. Do you think that books like that or opinions like that are much too soon for people to have answers for that? Or what do you think, kind of off the record? Obviously, there are no replicatable trials, as you said, but what do you think compared to all those other people that are kind of ringing this alarm bell with such ferocity?
I think to a certain extent, thinking about the possible negative implications of technology use, including social media, smartphones, etc., is very important for us to consider those. Just like it is important to consider other things that children do in their life, children, adolescents who appear to be more susceptible to problematic behaviors in general, and that is because of their development, the psychosocial development, which isn't completed in childhood and adolescence yet. So we know that engaging with technology a lot, spending a lot of time on social media, spending a lot of time on smartphones may indeed have an impact on behaviors, on cognitions, on emotions. However, when we're thinking really about the addiction element, the research is still very much in its infancy. A lot more work needs to be done. But
Right.
publishing such books, considering the possible impacts, even if they may be in some ways exaggerated, is an important first step in the right direction, because it opens up the dialogue about those kinds of problems. It allows researchers to come up with new research questions, new ways in which those kinds of problems may be assessed in the future as well. It may also give possible future funding bodies the incentive to fund research in the area, which is something that is very limited at this point in time. So there is limited research funding available for this particular research area, which must change in the future. Another problem that we find with the research is also that it's very difficult to actually collaborate as researchers. It's very difficult to collaborate with the relevant industries, such as the gaming industry, social media industry, etc., because they are very reluctant to share their data, the behavioral data that they are actually gathering from everyday technology use. And without
Right.
being able to have that kind of those kinds of data, it's difficult for researchers to make the right conclusions about the kind of results that they're anticipating to be had. So, really thinking about all those kinds of issues, it's not easy to say about what exactly is the impact of so and so many hours of social media use, for example. Is very difficult. We also have to bear in mind the characteristics of the individual, so the personality traits, their individual environments, as well as the cultural environment they may be situated in. All of those kinds of factors really contribute to the ways in which technology is used, as well as to the impact that technology use may have on the individual users.
Okay. So I guess a first step would be if policymakers could maybe mandate that these social media companies they would have to share their data in which to at least help researchers along the path. But I guess none of us are surprised that they're reluctant to share that data.
Well, I agree with you. So collaborations are essential. Collaborations with the industry, collaborations also with governments who are starting to see the problem more as being more serious as well. So I think the inclusion of gaming disorder as an official diagnosis is really paving the way for a more concrete understanding of what is actually happening, what kinds of problems may ensue, what does that mean for the individual, and then really thinking about what can we do in order to alleviate the problem. And I think when thinking about alleviation of the problem, we cannot only think about treatment, which of course is very important for those individuals who require it, but
Hmm.
on the other hand, we also must think about prevention in the first instance. So really preventing the problems from occurring in the first instance. What can we do as researchers, as governments, as the industry, in order to make sure that the products that are being produced are safe for users to use, that the ways they're being used are safe, and that the users are protected. We have seen similar protections available for within the gambling industry, where gamblers are indeed, being made aware of their behaviors, or where there are limits set, for example, to their gambling behaviors in order to protect them. And I think user protection, as well as increasing corporate social responsibility, are very, very important tools in, when thinking about the future and how it could look in order to support people when using technology.
Gotcha. I noticed in your bio that you work with various government organizations. So I suppose as a thought experiment, if tomorrow I was able to, you know, brandish you a benevolent dictator, Dr. Kuss, what sort of policies would you want to see implemented right away for schools or smartphone use? Is there anything that you've thought of that, you know, if you could snap your fingers and have done, you would want implemented?
Yes, I think the main thing that I would want to see within the school context, for example, would be open conversations between the children with their teachers as well as the parents, to make technology use an open field of conversation, really being able to converse about why are people using the technology, why are the children engaging with technology, how are they engaging with it. This is where some of the behavioral data would come in really handy, would be really important for us to have. And then really, the awareness of all parties that really technology use in and of itself may be very beneficial for the individual, but understanding where the crux might be, where that kind of behavior might become problematic. So really providing the psychosocial education of how technology can be used in a safe way, how it can be beneficial, but also preventing at the same time negative or potentially problematic behaviors from occurring in the first place.
Right. Yeah, because it seems like one of these issues where government mandates could um, kind of clash with what some parents want, and other ones, for some parents, it can't act fast enough. Because I've heard of instances from friends of mine that who are teachers that say they would like to implement a no phone policy in their classrooms, and some parents are overwhelmingly for this, and other ones are like, no, I want to be able to text my kid whenever I want. It doesn't matter what class they're like. It seems like there is almost a codependency part on the parents' relationship with some of their kids that they don't want to, and so I'm curious how those open conversations would go, where it's not data driven, it's more how people feel, and if that would just cause more clashes. Have you seen anyone try to implement these things in the UK yet, or are we not there at this point?
I know that there are a lot of conversations currently going on about phones in the classrooms, and a number of parties, including schools themselves, saying no, we don't want any phones in classrooms. And we really have to think about, why would we want those phones in the classrooms in the first place? Is it because parents want to be able to communicate with their children at any point in time? Well, what was it like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when that
Right.
wasn't the case? Was it necessary then? I think we really have to ask those sometimes uncomfortable questions. And once we realize that those questions perhaps are not as difficult to answer as we might think that they are in the first instance, things might change. So, there is also the question of to what extent do we want to use technology in general in the classroom? So, how much online education should there be? Should the children have their laptops out in all the classes at all
Mm.
times? Is that a sensible approach? And if so, do we want to block any certain apps from those laptops or from those tablets that might be used in the classroom? So I think there are quite a number of questions that need to be asked in the school context, and those questions need to be answered, in my opinion, in a conversation that includes the children, the parents, as well as the teachers. So parents often also require the education about children's behaviors, about technology use, because often they have limited knowledge and limited insight into how technology is being used by their children. And they may, over pathologize actually healthy technology use behaviors, which may be problematic in the end.
Right. Yeah, because one friend of mine who's a parent of a newly teenage girl, and they're having quite a lot of issues with smartphone use in the house. And he said they're trying to discipline and take away the phone. And a psychologist they work with says like, no, that's her property. You can't take away the phone. And the parents are really struggling, thinking like, well, if if my daughter was on drugs, like, am I not allowed to take away that dependency? And so like, there's a lot of this correlative people are trying to make, and it seems no one kind of knows what's a violation of that child's privacy, where it's incumbent of the parent to step in and be like, this has got to end. And I can imagine being, I don't have kids, I can imagine being super challenging to realize there's a loss of connection with your child, and it's this device that's that seems to be in the middle. Have you seen any data coming out about things like that?
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize that, even though we can class behavioral addiction, such as social media addiction or gaming addiction, alongside substance related addiction, so the more traditional kind of addictions like alcoholism and other substance use disorders, we have to bear in mind that behavioral addictions work very differently on the person's brain in comparison to substance related addictions. So, substance related addictions have a direct chemical impact on the brain. Whereas behavioral addictions, the impact is there. We know that from neuroimaging studies, for example, but the impact is much more subtle. And also, when we're thinking about social media use behaviors, for example, as an example of technology use behaviors, we know that they're significantly more complex than drug use, than alcohol use. Yeah, so with alcohol, we can say, oh, tomorrow we're going to stop, we're not going to drink ever again, and this is us sorted, let's say, in a very simplified kind of a term. You cannot do the same thing with technology use. We are dependent on technology use. As a society, we're dependent on it for our work. So you need your technology in order to be able to do your job. So do I. And children will have to do the same thing. We're dependent on it very often also for our social communications, our social contacts. We have seen that especially during the COVID pandemic. Where we were, I think the internet was really a blessing for us to be able to get in touch with those people that we weren't able to see face to face anymore. Very fundamental, social. We are, as humans, we're social animals. We require the social connection that is given to us also via the means of technology. We're using technology for purchasing items. We're using technology to update our insurance policies. Any aspect of life is mediated by technology nowadays. For that reason, we cannot, equate technology use with, for example, the use of alcohol. It is significantly more complex. But when we're thinking about, people who may be addicted to playing particular games, it is often particular games, specific games that have a higher risk of producing problems, or the engagement in those might potentially produce problems. Then for those particular games, we could say, don't play that particular game anymore, which is often done in the context of treatment. But in general, technology use, taking away the phone, which is a means by which we're able to do all these things that I've previously mentioned, is it is not a viable strategy over the long term.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to talk about specific games for a second, and I'll use myself as an example here. So, in the middle of 2020, we were kind of just coming out of lockdown. I had a couple deaths in the family that were overseas that I was not able to go home for. I was living in a pretty awful relationship, and we were kind of together 24/7 because of this thing. So, like, the pressure cooker of my life, I don't think has ever been so severe. And I found myself playing this superhero fight game on my iPhone. And it wasn't until I had spent like a few €100, which is completely beyond me. Like, I'm not a gambler. I'm not someone that ever makes impulsive sort of spending decisions like that. And so I remember I pressed the button and bought whatever it was for that game. And I thought, oh shit, like it was kind of like I almost dropped the phone. I was so shocked by my own actions. And I've always thought about that because I had to delete the phone. Sorry, I had to delete the game at that time and really think about, like, okay, what am I not dealing with in my life right now? Like, maybe emotionally or whatever, that I'm seeking this validation and positive feedback loop from this game that's so powerful. I'm willing to spend real money on it, which I've always said is absurd. So what sort of games are you seeing that are producing this sort of feedback loop that is more akin to, obviously not a drug response because that's a more of a chemical change, but like what sort of games are having these sort of negative loops that continue for people that make addiction possible?
So in the end, I think what we need to say really is that it's not necessarily particular types of games that are addictive, but it's, people's behaviors that might be addictive in the end. And there
Right.
are certain games that have certain characteristics that may be associated more with problematic behaviors, such as excessive gaming, addictive gaming. And research that we've done also at Nottingham Trent University has shown that those kinds of games are often massively multiplayer online games. Those games tend to be endless, so you can play them anytime. You can log on day and night. There will always be something going on.
Yeah.
And they never end because there's always some other thing that you can achieve in the game. Yeah, so different kinds of goals that you can engage in with the game as well. They have important social elements as well. So, building some sort of a community or a grouping within the game is very often very much encouraged in the form of clans, guilds, etc. That's an important element. And the possibility of connection with anyone all over the world. And as you've already very rightly mentioned, engaging in those kinds of games allows us to have those rewards present very quickly. In the form of achievements and as well as recognition in the game. All of these things are significantly more easily to obtain in comparison to outside of the game. So you might be working on your career for 10 years and you put a lot of effort into it, etc. And in comparison, in the game, you spend several weeks playing day and night, and you become a hero. So you're a big guy within your guild, within your clan. They are all looking up to you because you've developed all these wonderful skills. You've got all the great items and the gear and everything that's needed in the game. So the achievement and the recognition is much more easily obtainable, which, all of those kinds of characteristics might indicate really that those kinds of games who are able to give you those kinds of rewards can be potentially more addictive to some people who have certain vulnerabilities, who may be in a position in their life where the game can more easily take over other aspects of their lives, like their relationships, their careers, their school performance, etc.
Right. Yeah, I would say you nailed every aspect of that game that I was playing aside from the social aspect. Like there were other people playing, but there was no conversation, people I knew that weren't playing. But I think also there was a high amount of distractibility built into that game because there were so many different goals, as you mentioned, to reach. So when I was trying to deal with like, okay, this person in my family has passed away, we're in the middle of this pandemic, I don't feel comfortable ending this relationship in the middle of a pandemic, we just had another fight, like there's all these things. But then I entered into this realm of this game that kind of felt like Ready Player One. I was just all in it, and I'm like, okay, I can upgrade this armor, I can fight this person, I can do this today, I could do, like, it was just all encompassing to take all my planning brain away from all the other things in my life, that I end up coming back to it day after and day after. And I even downloaded it sometime in the last year just to see what my reaction would be to it. And I think I played it for like half an hour and I was like, well, this really, like, this isn't that much fun anymore. Like this, like I'm glad to, because I wanted to check what my response was now compared to then, and then it was like almost a lifeline to take my brain away from the mental health elements I was struggling with. So, is there anything in the future that you think will be done for games that are built to be more addictive, or do we think that we have to kind of point the canon of mental health advocacy just at people to make them more aware of what they're going through, and then they'll stop playing that game? Like where do you come at this problem?
Well, I think the only way to come at this problem is a collaborative way, where we need collaboration between the various parties. And that is the gaming industries, the gaming developers, the players, of course, as well as the cultures in which they're situated, governments, as well as other stakeholders who have a role to play within the field, such as researchers, also clinicians, etc. So all of those players need to play together, as it were, in this context, to be able to develop a gaming environment that is safe, that is good for the gamers, because we need to bear in mind, gaming is for most of what it is an enjoyable pastime activity. People enjoy playing games, they're fun, they give you a bit of a distraction, they're different from your work environment, they're different from your school environment, they allow you to do something different, they allow you to be social, they allow you to be skillful, etc. And this is, I think, when we're thinking about games, any kinds of games, this is the main thing that games should be. They should be fun, and they shouldn't necessarily be dangerous. And what we can see is that, some people, unfortunately, some excessive gamers do develop negative consequences based on their excessive gaming, and we need to safeguard them. We need to prevent those behaviors from occurring. We need to have the research in order to know how can we help those people. We need to have the governments implementing policies in order to safeguard them. And of course, in the first instance, we need the industry to be able to collaborate as well, because in the end, they are the ones who are producing the games. They are the ones who have the behavioral data that is relevant for us in order to understand what is actually going on in the gaming field.
I love that people are looking into it that in depthly. And I guess considering that you created the cyberpsychology master's program at your university, and you've been studying this for so long, do you have any opinions that have changed from when you started out until now, like things that maybe are that progressed so much further than you believed, or a strong opinion you had at the start that has changed?
Yes, of course, opinions can change all the time with more knowledge being available, with new research coming out, with new technologies being developed, with new apps coming out as well. By all means, I think one of the very interesting things that has happened in recent years has been the COVID pandemic, where we've seen the importance of technology use. Yeah, so we always like to demonize it. The media like to demonize technology use in many ways. But we've seen the importance of it, how it can connect people, how good it can be. But on the other side of the coin, what we've also seen is how easy it is to become disinformed about what's happening in the world. Now we've got the presidential elections coming up in the States, and there is the worry by social media companies as well. Are they also going to impact the results again, like they might have done in the past? So we have the knowledge now that the information that was presented on social media, a lot of fake news, as it were, has contributed to the election outcomes. So there is a direct impact on the political world in which we live based on technology. And, because of what has happened in the past, we have additional knowledge now. And for that reason, we're able to change how things are being perceived. So I know, for example, that Meta's Facebook now is very keen to, limit disinformation campaigns with the tools that they've got available, etc. I'm sure more can be done, but I think, creating that additional awareness based on the history that we've been through is allowing us to be more knowledgeable, to be more informed, and to hopefully have a social media environment or generally technology environment that is that is better for all of us.
Right. So I suppose to switch gears from the negative to the positive a little bit. I saw a talk you gave a little while ago about social networking being a way of being, and I would agree with that. I know through my life I've been notified of a lot of events. I've been able to organize events, and without Facebook and some of these other platforms, would have been so arduous that I don't think I would be able to do it. But with messaging systems and email and things like that, like it's just become so easy compared to even 10 or 15 years ago. So where have you seen, because I believe that the talk I saw on YouTube from you was a few years ago, where have you seen that migrate to as far as how you believe the social networking is healthy for us, and it's a way that we can use social media and social networking to have more engaged lives, if you will?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a bit difficult to be able to distinguish between the benefits as well as the possible disadvantages of social media use, isn't it? Really, because it's very easy to be stuck on your Instagram account and just keep scrolling and looking for new information and so on and so forth. That very quickly happens, and that it happens for a lot of us. But I think what we need to bear in mind is, the possibility that technology offers us, and we can go back to the beginnings of the internet, looking at the 90s really. So the internet allowed us to connect people, yeah, to connect people, to share information. Those are the main things that it was there for. And this is still exactly what it does. So if we're looking for information, we will be asking Google, we will be looking on Wikipedia, whatever it is that we're trying to find. And if we want to connect with people, we're going to use our social media accounts. We connect to people on Twitter, we connect with them on TikTok, etc., etc. It allows us to be social. Allows us to see what is happening in our social life. So using technology in a healthy way, as it were, for those kinds of purposes, I don't see any problems with. But what I think is an issue is people realizing where it just becomes too much. If you spend half an hour a day looking through your Instagram, then there won't be an issue with that. But if you were to do that for 6 hours a day, then potentially that may impact on the rest of your life. You have less time available for your relationships, you have less time available for whatever you need to do in your house, etc., etc., assuming that you do a full-time job, and you spend that other time working. So really, bearing in mind how we personally use technology, being aware of the possible risks, but at the same time making use of the benefits, the convenience that the technology affords us. I don't see anything, I really don't see anything wrong with that, but we do need that kind of psychoeducation from an early age to teach what healthy technology use is like. Media literacy must be increased. And at the moment, I think we're still, unfortunately, quite limited in achieving that.
Yeah, I love the idea that like not it's mostly dose dependent. Devil is in the dose, if you will. Whereas I think we need to teach some emotional literacy in schools as well as media literacy, because sometimes I would love people to program my phone that if I'm on one social media site for longer than X amount of minutes, I would like something to pop up and be like, "What are you avoiding doing right now?" And so I can actually think about it and have this pattern interrupt, if you will, just to get me out of that sustained scroll that I don't even want to be doing, because it's a bit of like a soother for a child. Sometimes you're just like, okay, I'm just going to do this until I'm done. It's one of the reasons that I haven't downloaded and will not download TikTok. Like, friends of mine have told me how addictive it is and how long they can scroll in bed, and my phone's already banned from my room. I can't imagine having another scroller than Instagram. I guess for you, what social media app is like the danger zone for you? What are you very careful, or even in general, what sort of app do you feel like you have to police yourself?
Yeah, I think thinking generally social media apps, spending too much time on general social media. I don't have a lot of those because, I also don't want to be spending too much time on those myself. But I think what's really important is to realize yourself, your own behaviors. And I think very often it's very easy to just forget. You spend half an hour, 1.5 hours or whatever, scrolling through your various feeds on various media platforms. You don't really see where the time goes. You're not really thinking about it. You're not really conscious of what it is that you're doing and
Right.
how that makes you feel. I think that's the issue. What I would advocate is technology use that is directed. So I'm using my Facebook account, let's say, to organize a meetup with my friends. Yeah, so very as simple as that. Whereas, just mindlessly or passively scrolling through content may be quite different to that. We really want to be a bit more aware of what our behaviors look like. And this is also why our smartphones are often now able to tell us exactly how much time we're spending on certain apps. It's sometimes really interesting to actually look through the stats that your phone is collecting of your
Right.
behavior. I often do that exercise with my students, in the university as well. And sometimes with very interesting results, they often can't actually believe that they're spending so much time on certain apps. And I think once you realize that this is indeed the case, it's much easier for you to change your behaviors, to become a bit more aware of it. It's almost like a light bulb moment.
Right.
And the technology gives us these kinds of options now. It has those kinds of functions, and I'm sure those will increase in the future as well, as we are becoming more aware of how we need to improve our mental health, how we need to be conscious about the behaviors that we're engaging in online, and how those might impact us on an emotional level as well.
Yeah, I would really love to see the Android or iOS operating system have more of these triggers, because I don't have any plans to ever changed from iPhone to Android. It doesn't matter if I start using my phone 90% less, I still like and value all the things that the iPhone provides. And so I think if they give us these checks and balances to put on ourselves, I think it could make our lives more productive. It'll make us feel better, and I think it'll help us use our phones better. But right now, I think a lot of us have a pseudo relationship with our phone, or it's like we all know we could be using it less or should be using it less. I really don't know one person that wouldn't say like, yeah, I could use my phone a little bit less than I do today. And so it's really interesting to hear how far some of these case studies can go for how harmful it can be, that I'm sure you've seen. I know when I was researching you for this interview, I saw that you've been an expert witness in a whole bunch of cases, and I found that really interesting. Are you able to share some cases or things, and like why someone with your background would need to be called into a courtroom to be an expert witness?
Well, I think there are specific skills of a person who's, been in both in the media world as well as in the world of psychology, and been able to combine those. As a cyber psychologist, there are really few of us who have that very expert and specialist niche sort of knowledge. And sometimes that kind of knowledge is requested in a courtroom by the police, by other researchers, by governmental agencies. It's our that kind of expertise can be used in various ways. I think where we're taking that kind of knowledge from, those insights that we have as cyber psychologists, is the research in the field, and the research will be continuously happening. It's ongoing. There will be new insights coming up every day, and that's also something that makes the field so interesting. That makes my personal work so interesting, is that there's always something else that needs to be studied, something else that is going to come up, different kinds of questions that might emerge depending on what is currently happening in our lives as well. So I think being able to share some of those insights with the public, with yourself, with other agencies as well, is a great benefit and a privilege.
Yeah, it really seems to be on everyone's mind now, which I think is really great. I remember I was trying to limit my Facebook use even like 20 or 10 years ago, giving a friend a password and being like, "Oh, give this to me if I need it," and it worked quite well. And other people who knew I was doing this would have a laugh, being like, "Oh, you can't limit your use." And years later, they would tell me like, "Yeah, I also had an issue logging on to some things." And I think it's a problem for all of us. Like we're all humans. We all have this brain that is kind of simple and complex at the same time, and we can get these dopamine hits, quote unquote, from these notifications and messages, and it becomes kind of even like a lifeline. I mean, I live in Spain, and a lot of my network and family lives in Canada, and so on some of these apps, I have a lot of the way that I continue to bond and stay connected with a lot of my family and friends there. So it becomes a bit of a social lifeline sometimes as well. And so I guess in that, since it is so complex, and you really highlighted that for me, which I appreciate, that it can't be looked at as a dependency as strongly as, let's say, a narcotic or alcohol. What would be a menu that you might give to people, friends, or people you'd speak to, about how we can look at our technology and internet use and kind of manage it properly in our own lives? Like how would you recommend any of us go about thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, a question that I've asked myself many times. And I think if we are thinking about smartphone use, for example, you personally have already spoken about ways in which you're trying to reduce your smartphone use by not having your phone with you at all times. This is definitely a recommendation that I would make. So if it's possible, make sure that you don't allow phones at the dinner table in a family environment, so nobody's actually using technology at the dinner table. That will allow you to have actual old school conversations with your family members, with your significant others. Something as simple as that, but everybody needs to abide by that. You can't say to your child, to your adolescent child, let's say your 12-year-old, well, you're not allowed to have your phone at dinner, but you're yourself actually writing your emails whilst you're eating your dinner. So
Right.
We need parents who are modeling the right kinds of behaviors. I think this is very important. So technology free times during the day, like dinner time, technology free zones in the house, such as, for example, your bedroom. If you don't use technology in your bedroom, it's going to improve your sleep. We know that, technology used before bed can very detrimentally impact sleep. And bad sleep can lead to a variety of both physical as well as mental health problems. There are very, very strong relationships between those. And I think, if you're working, if you're studying, try and have the phone out of sight, so not on your desk. We know by simply having the phone on your desk without even interacting with it, your attention is going to drift to the phone. It's, yeah, exactly, this is what happens. Put it in your bag, put it in another room, and you will see how much more attentive you are, how much more on the ball you might be when doing that. And I think, small changes to our behaviors, like the ones that I've just mentioned, may indeed have a great impact on how we're feeling, how we're able to communicate and engage with the people around us, and how efficient we might be with our work as well as other academic pursuits we might be engaged with.
Okay. And for people who think that they may have an internet addiction or a gaming addiction, or let's say they know someone that has such an issue, like how would you recommend them going about to get help for themselves or somebody else?
So this would really, being able to find help for actual addiction-related problems as a consequence of technology use. It depends on where you are based geographically. So, for example, here in England, we have a gaming disorder center now in London, which I would advise people in this country to get in contact with if gaming is a problem that they might have. In other countries, there might also be particular clinics, particular treatment centers that may, offer relevant services as well. So it would be important to first find out, what is available in your vicinity, and then get in contact with people, with the professionals who may indeed be able to help you.
Okay. And I guess moving on to what trends you're seeing coming on in the future, is there anything that you think we should be look out for that's coming up that maybe is not, it's on the horizon, but we haven't got there yet?
There's always, there are always new developments within the field of technology.
Stay
I know,
vigilant.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, staying vigilant, but also, staying curious.
Right.
Without necessarily implying that aspect of danger or protection that's required, etc. So being curious about what's happening. We see new developments with, for example, virtual reality, augmented reality kind of technologies. We can think about the metaverse on the horizon now. How is that going to change how we behave online? How is that going to change our feelings, our cognitions, etc. There's very little research on those kinds of more augmented forms of technology. I personally would be very interested to see how that might, impact our lives in the future. Other than that, as I was already saying, if we're thinking about the political scenes in which we might have an interest, I would be very interested in seeing the election outcomes in the States. Um, how might they be, influenced by social media, by fake news, as it were, like they were in the past? Perhaps new developments within the fields of gaming as well. We've seen over the last few years the introduction of gambling related elements into the field of gaming, such as
Right.
skins, such as items that might appear that you need to pay for, that are indeed items that are good luck items. So if you're lucky, you might receive them, but perhaps you might not. This is something that might be quite problematic, and I think some of those introductions of gaming elements might need to be monitored more closely. More research, of course, needs to be done. And I would really hope that we are, as researchers, going to be able to make use of behavioral data collected by the industry in order to have clearer insights about the impacts of technology use behaviors on the user.
Okay. Yeah, because the in-app gaming purchases I find quite ridiculous. That, oh, my light just went out. That, for example, like I think gambling in general, like we can shut all these casinos down tomorrow. I think it really it targets people that are looking for, like, for these. They're just giving away their money for and I think there's much to be said for the choice for them to be able to do that, but I do think it ends up preying on people that are more susceptible to going and playing these games. So to have these apps in which, like you said, you're going to pay for something to increase your progress in the game, and otherwise you can't do that. I would love to see some sort of legislation against that, because I think, again, it's preying on somebody that is trying to play something for enjoyment, and it's taking like the underbelly and creating a negative outcome. Is that where you're what you would advocate for as well?
Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, as I've said before, games should be there for fun. They are, and should be an enjoyable pastime activity that people just like to do outside of their of the other things in their lives that they're doing. And there are, as we know also from research that is existing in the present day and age, there are some elements of the games that appear to be more problematic than others, such as, for example, loot boxes, etc. But
Right. Hmm.
what I would definitely advocate is that collaboration between all the players, between all the stakeholders, and that is the industry, that is governments, that is the researchers, and of course the gamers, and potentially their parents and significant others as well. Because only if we've got that multifactorial understanding of the gaming itself, the gaming behavior in its context, are we able to come up with solutions that actually work.
Yeah, it does seem so multi-pronged for a way to come on this from a very reasonable perspective to help people. So I really appreciate of the amount of texture you're able to give us and to give me to understanding this problem. Maybe in a year or so we'll revisit this, and we'll be inside the Apple Vision Pro, and we'll be standing in the Grand Canyon having this conversation. So thank you very much for sharing some time for us, and all of your expertise. I think it'll really help a lot of people.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for having me.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you didn't enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.